To Justice Now, a critical moment for LGBTQ immigrants. Thanks to everyone in attendance here at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark, and thank you to all of you who are participating via Google Hangouts. Hey out there. Thank you especially to Immigration Equality for organizing today's events, and of course to my school here at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark for providing this wonderful space. For today's town hall, we're going to discuss a few things. First, we want to talk about the impact of the threat of deportation and why deportation is dangerous and can be a death sentence for the LGBT community. We also want to discuss why it's important to ensure that LGBTQ asylum seekers can access life-saving asylum. And we will outline the urgent need to overhaul the inhumane and completely dysfunctional immigration detention system. So our goal this afternoon is to inform, but also to inspire. All of us have a responsibility to right the injustices that our communities are suffering. At the end of the conversation, we will ask you to take action with us so that you can make a collective impact. I'm going to introduce our panelists and myself to get us started. My name is Marisol Hernandez. I came to the United States in 1988 when I was a year old and have been living in New Jersey undocumented for almost all my life. I am the first openly undocumented student at this school, the Rutgers School of Law in Newark. And as a straight ally, the LGBTQ immigrant struggle is my struggle as well. So these fascinating and powerful panelists, we're very privileged to have them here today. So I'm honored to introduce you to you all this afternoon. We have Stacey Long Simmons, who's Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at the National LGBTQ Task Force. Hey, Stacey. We also have Carlos Padilla, who's the Program Coordinator at the Queer Undocumented Immigrant Project, QUIP, at United We Dream. Hey, Carlos. And Clement Lee, Asylum and Detention Staff Attorney at Immigration Equality, the leading nonprofit in the country that provides direct legal services to and advocacy for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and HIV-positive immigrants. Good afternoon. We also have Eva Flores, who's an asylum winner and transgender activist from Mexico. Hello, good afternoon. So let's go over very quickly the format of today's town hall. Today's event is meant to be a conversation. We prepared questions to spark the discussion, and we're going to rely on our experts and impacted individuals here today to share their experience. Throughout the event, we'll be receiving questions via Twitter using the hashtag #NoMoreDelays. And we'll be taking questions from the audience as well from you guys here. Please write down your questions on the index card that was provided for you and pass them down to our assistant moderator right here for them. So, you guys ready to get started? Yeah, all right, let's go. Our first topic for this afternoon is on deportation. Today around the world, it is a crime to be LGBTQ in more than 80 countries around the world, and in so many more, being out and proud is impossible. So this question is for Carlos. Carlos, why is deportation dangerous for the LGBTQ community, and who has the power to fix it?
Well, deportations to the LGBT community is dangerous for various reasons. One, the one that I see the most impactful is the fact that we're not even talking about them as often as we should. We are currently living in two strong, powerful movements that are being led by the LGBT rights movement and the immigrant rights movement. And with victories such as marriage equalities around the country, with Employment Non-Discrimination Act that's being passed by the President for the executive action. And in 2012, with the administration granting relief from deportations to Dreamers, in many of these stories, the narrative of undocumented queers or undocumented trans folks have not been lifted. And I think that's one of the biggest risks of deportations for our community, the fact that our stories have not been yet exposed as often and as much as they should. The second thing is that, as Marisol mentioned, there's currently 80 countries around the world, more than 80 countries around the world that have anti-homosexuality laws. And even within those countries, even some countries that do have certain protections, such as Mexico City, which I come from, I migrated from Mexico at the age of 2. Although they have passed certain laws in certain districts, the cultural stigma that exists for trans communities and queer communities is very much alive. I actually just got the benefit of traveling to Mexico 3 weeks ago. And after 15 years, I was able to return back to my home country, to my little village. And the only trans and queer folks that were in the community were the ones, the ones that were alive. And they were the ones that were living in not having homes. They were considered the mentally challenged of the town. And I think to have an option of being raised in my little village, if I had to come out as queer, that would have not been a choice for me. Our movements really need to uplift those stories, because currently there's more than 267,000 adult undocumented LGBT folks that live in the intersection of these two strong movements. And for us as undocumented queers, again, undocumented LGBT folks, it is very important for our stories to be uplifted, and making sure that, the relief for our communities is granted. And there's one specific person that comes to mind that can solve some of these issues. President Obama currently holds the legal authority to protect our families from being deported, from being separated, and for many from being deported to death, based on the countries that continue to have anti-homosexuality laws. He's been advised by the Department of Justice and by many of his public advocates and his leaders around his administration that he, as a matter of fact, can act to grant relief from deportation. Now, no, this is not no permanent relief. This is not a permanent, solution, but it is a band-aid that many of us that live under the urgency and the threat of deportations, and biggest of all, the threat of being separated from our families, is something that we really need. So President Obama has the full legal authority to really act on behalf of our communities by granting administrative relief, or expanding the currently successful deferred action program to all of our communities, starting with the LGBT community that has been stigmatized and has been excluded from various successful programs such as DACA.
Great, thank you, Carlos. For the remaining minute, would anybody else like to weigh in from the panel?
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in. I definitely want to echo the points that Carlos made. I think that this is a pivotal moment in time when not only are these really strong movements, but there is really a pinnacle in terms of where the country is. There's a wave of support for LGBTQ issues, and there's also a burgeoning recognition that in the not too distant future, this will be a country predominantly of people of color, comprised of people of color. And so as we understand those demographics and as we seize our moment, we absolutely need to step up and do all that we can. One of the things that we did over the summer, when initially we were at least hopeful that there would be some action on the part of the administration, was we generated a sign-on letter of LGBTQ leadership organizations to really ask the president to do the things that you outlined, Carlos, to make sure that there's a suspension of further deportations, to make sure that there's an expanded deferred action, and to make sure that some of the detention policies that are currently in place are actually amended and revised so that our most vulnerable populations are not continuing to.
Next question is to Eva. Considering your experience, we would like to know what it's like to live under the threat of deportation.
Well, I grew up, I'm from Mexico, and I came to this country when I was 21 years old, and I didn't know about the opportunities of getting asylum or anything that it will help me to get a better life here in this country. And when I found out about immigration equality, and I finally got the chance to meet these people, and they, spoke to me about all the opportunities that I could have if I was granted asylum. But of course, all this took a while, and meanwhile, I was waiting for my asylum. It was just very scary to know that I could probably go back to Mexico, where I was trying to get away from all the government, the police department, and even my own family that will abuse me physically and verbally, and I grew up thinking that I was wrong for being the way I am. And just knowing that I will have to go back to that, it was very stressful and terrifying for me. I was thrown in jail, and because people didn't know how to treat me or how to approach me, they put me in a separate cell. And the police who was supposed to protect me was abusing me. And just thinking about this moment, it was very scary, and I will have nightmares, and I had to be on therapy for months because it was just very scary. It's just, you cannot find the right words to express the feeling of knowing that you can go back to what you've been running away from.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing. It's very hard to do so, so we really appreciate your willingness to do so. We're going to move on to the topic of asylum. We'll be hearing back from Eva in a bit. Opponents of immigration have targeted the asylum system for many, many years. But asylum, as you may have already began to understand, is a life-saving form of relief that protects individuals based on their race, religion, political affiliation, and membership to a particular social group that are at risk of persecution and violence. So Stacey, this is for you. We'd like to hear from you as to why it's important to protect LGBTQ asylum.
Well, I first of all just want to acknowledge, Ava, that your personal story, I know it's difficult to talk about, but it just is so important to continue to paint a picture of what the experiences are, because we have numbers and we have political arguments, but the bottom line is that real people's lives like yours are impacted on a day-to-day basis. Even as we sit here right now doing this webcam conference, there are people who are being abused and who are suffering. So thank you for that. The United High Commission for Refugees has told us that more than 40 million people across the globe are being forced to leave because of war, because of famine, because of political instability. And so we know that there are, mentioned earlier, 80 countries that have laws that criminalize LGBTQ people simply because of who they are. And so the 10 countries that have sentenced people to death for homosexual activities, homosexual acts, whatever that may be, Asylum offers a lifeboat to people. It offers a lifeline to people, a way to be able to literally preserve their lives and live. And so when asylum seekers come to this country, they're already in a vulnerable state. They're already having been traumatized, post-traumatic stress, mental illness, mental emotional strain, as well as their financial circumstances, having put together as many coins as possible to be able to literally get to our shores or get across our border. And so one of the things that people who are fleeing here who are LGBT people talk about is the fact that they're leaving a situation where it's been illegal to be who they are. And so the thing that's not on the forefront of their mind is, oh, when I come to a public official to try to apply for asylum, I think I'll mention that I'm LGBTQ. It's very counterintuitive. It is not the first thing that people are thinking about when they get here, after they have gone through suffering because of who they are. And so there's not a culture of safety around that. And unfortunately, the current status of the law is that there's a 1-year filing deadline. So there's a 1-year time clock that is running. So the point at which you enter this country, that is the time period in which you have to file for asylum. And even though we're members of the social group that you mentioned, Marisol, it's just not obvious to most people that that's something they should come forward with. And people who are here, asylum seekers, are not eligible to work. Sometimes they're being held in intolerable circumstances and conditions in detention centers. They are struggling to meet their basic needs around housing and food and clothing and transportation, healthcare, psychological care, etc. And so the other point I have to make, because I'm a lawyer and I'm sitting next to a lawyer, right? Lawyers are good people. But the fact of the matter is, asylum seekers are not eligible for legal representation. I mean, thank goodness we have providers who are nonprofits, providers like Immigration Equality who do offer that kind of assistance, but it's not the same kind of right that people who are in this country have in terms of free legal representation. And I think that, it's safe to say without the legal representation, many of these cases just don't get to see the light of day and they're not swiftly dealt with.
Great, thank you, Stacey. So Eva, back to you. We'd like to hear about how your life has changed since you were granted asylum.
Well, I got the chance to go back to school, And although, I still have more dreams, I want to go back to school again. Right now, I'm working as a hairstylist. I got the chance to get my own house, which is great. Like when you've been running around, when you've been from place to place, get your own house, open your own door at night after a long day from work, it's great. Know that out there are good people, that not everything is bad, that not everybody just is onto you. So, all those little things that more people take for granted. It's just so great to know that you also deserve that, and that, all good things are gonna come to you too. So that's great. It's amazing. It's like a day and night.
Wonderful. I'm so happy for you. It's great. Thank you.
If I could just jump for 1 second. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be among such esteemed colleagues. Immigration Equality works with LGBT asylum seekers every day. Every day, people come into our office that are scared to go back to their home countries. There's been a lot of talk about the countries that criminalize being LGBT, but I just would want to add that there's a little bit more than that. Sexual orientation and gender identity is something that sort of touches every aspect of your life, right? It's not just who you sleep with, it's not just how you present your gender, but it's something that determines how you feel yourself, how you present yourself to the world, who you make friends with, who you view as otherizing, who you feel scared of. There's so much that it becomes part of you. And Audre Lorde's great quote that people don't have single issue problems because they don't live single issue lives. So when people come to my office, my Kleenex box goes really quickly because there's so many ways that people can persecute you based on your sexual orientation and gender identity. There's definitely the ones that people think about being put in jail, being put on trial, but there's things like conversion therapy where people try to make you be not LGBT anymore. There are things such as forced marriage where you're not physically harmed in a way that involves blood and cuts, but there's something that you have to live your life every day pretending to live in this form that is counter to everything you believe in. So, there are so many ways in which people can sort of be harmed. The words asylum, withholding, removal, and convention against torture are really legal and sort of difficult to understand. But one thing that I love about our work is that it's not hard to understand that somebody was in danger. Now they can apply for asylum, and now they're not in danger anymore. That is not a hard concept to understand. My role, I feel, as a lawyer is taking that very not hard to understand concept, is sort of translating it into this miasma, this sort of very hard to Byzantine bureaucracy that there's so many ways blocking it. So this is why I think that asylum is really, really important. Thank you, Eva, for your story.
So to finish real quickly, besides all of us, who's responsible for protecting asylum now that we understand how crucial it is? So whose responsibility is it to protect asylum?
Sure. I think that there are multiple players at role here. I think that Congress, of course, is the body of our government that is in charge with making laws, and the Constitution says that Congress has more power than the other branches to make sure that immigration is part of their body of what they rule in. So as long as things stall in Congress over and over again, these are vulnerable asylum seekers who will be victim to this sort of it's the sort of the inertia that's sort of happening there. So it's really, really important that Congress does it. I agree. President Obama is somebody who, as the person in charge of the executive branch, he is the person who determines whether or not this number of people are going to be deported, whether these people are going to be detained. And for LGBT asylum seekers, where the consequences of that can be really, really great, it's really important to him. He has the power and authority to act, and he should.
Great. Someone else like to chip in?
Yeah, I just want to add that with respect to the one-year filing deadline that I spoke about earlier, that's actually just a congressional fix. Congress is the only body that would be empowered to make that fix. And so we have the court system, sort of the day-to-day judges that Clement is making cases and arguing before, that are making decisions on a point-by-point, case-by-case basis. But with respect to being able to have a huge impact, there's the White House, which could take action that would stop these deportations and some of the activities that happen within detentions. And with respect to the asylum deadline, it's just arbitrary. We really need it to be expanded because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And that's something that Congress could fix.
All right, thank you. Clement, we're going to come back to you in a moment because now we're going to talk about immigrant detention. Currently, there are over 220 immigration detention centers across the country, some here right in Essex County, New Jersey. These centers are run by for-profit, yes, you heard it, for-profit corporations through government contracts, spending, and taxpayer dollars. We are funding these detention centers, folks. In recent months, allegations of abuses and mistreatment and inhumane conditions have been reported in the media, and many more go unreported at all. So, Clement, what is immigration detention and how are LGBTQ people treated there?
Right, so immigration detention centers is another name that sort of sounds, oh, what is that detention? Is that like saying after school? Once you see one, make no mistake, it's a jail. It is a place that is supposed to be a civil form of detention that is supposed to hold immigrants to make sure that they attend their hearings. When you actually look at one, there are jumpsuits, there are barbed wire, there are people that are in charge of making sure that you don't have any freedom of movement. It's a scary, scary place. So one of the big asymmetries is that it's supposed to be this sort of civil form of detention that's sort of supposed to be, you know, in the realm of maybe the Department of Motor Vehicles. Instead, a lot of places that are meant to hold people who have been accused of serious crimes instead have part of their bed space that are supposed to be rented out to ICE. And you know, it's like Marisol said, there's a profit motive in there, and it's sort of more bodies equals more money for detention. Why this is an inappropriate place for LGBT folks. So I go to these detention centers all the time. It is a place where while you're held in jail, you are ongoing having your immigration case going on. People are applying for asylum. So applying for asylum while in detention is a little bit bizarre. You know, anybody who's a United States citizen, it's not going to be something that you experience. It's sort of, while you're in jail, you have to have sort of this, prepare for this day where you talk about your life in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, your entire life. In order to win asylum, you have to have evidence to prove that what you say is true. So if you're LGBT, it sounds weird. You have to prove that you're actually LGBT. You have to get statements from people to say that you're queer. You have to get photos. You have to get medical records. To do that in immigration detention is kind of dangerous for a couple of reasons. Like Ava said, a lot of the people that she were afraid of was from her own country. In immigration detention, where you can be surrounded by people from your own country, to gather that evidence can put yourself in danger. So it's sort of this, you know, catch-22, where the American government is like, okay, you know, we recognize that we have a humanitarian responsibility to protect people, but in order for you to access that, we're going to lock you up in this room. You got to get all this evidence, and you got to do it in a way that's not very private. And if you don't do that, we're going to deport you. So it sort of makes me think of that book, The New Jim Crow, where, you know, you're like, oh, you know, that sounds like it makes sense that one part, you know, those people are in jail. They're definitely going to show up to their court proceedings. But when you put everything is that people end up having no real chance to access relief. And you know, I love the work that Immigration Equality does. We go and we represent people directly, but it's part of a larger conversation. It's part of a larger dialogue in which this is sort of a systematic problem, right? This problem was not something that was individualized to her, but it represents us as a whole, as a community. And in 2014, where you know, even just a few years ago, that if you told me that there was going to be a transgender person on the cover of Time magazine, I would have horns and there's going to be leprechauns and white clowns and castles. So it's so lovely, and I think that we have the momentum now to make this happen. Immigrant rights are human rights. LGBT rights are human rights, and you know, more so than ever, we need to make sure that we are doing our best to make sure that this makes sense.
So for the entire group now, who has the power to reform and overhaul this broken system it puts in place some of these counterintuitive procedures and requirements that you've been discussing? Who has the power to reform that?
Well, before I answer the piece about who has the power to change it, I want to just piggyback on what you said, Clement, about the profit motive. One of the things that few people know is that over half of the immigrants who are currently detained by ICE, which is the facility, the Immigration and Custody government body, are housed in facilities that are run by private corporations. And so what we understand is that the Corrections Corporation of America is earning over $210 million a year detaining immigrants. So there's a profit motive there, and we're talking big dollars here. And we really have to understand that part of like changing the lever of change is recognizing that people are going to fight to hold on to that profit motive. And so that's partly what we're up against. The money that's earned through that corporation and the detention system, and the opportunity to actually treat people humanely and have fewer people being held in deplorable conditions. So I definitely think that we have a few tools at our disposal. As I mentioned earlier, the letter that we sent to the White House asking the White House to take actions is something that we can't not continue doing. We have got to keep doing that. But we also already have some laws on the books that agencies could be utilizing. We passed the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and ICE still has under that act the ability to take steps to protect people from being harmed, particularly with respect to transgender women who are being faced with deplorable, harsh, inhumane conditions. So really pressing on the government, you're not sitting on, you shouldn't be sitting on your hands while people are being held. You actually are already authorized to be taking certain steps. So how about if you start to do that?
Yes, so I've talked about the president and the Congress having power, but one more thing that I did want to say is that I think that one of the big ways that immigration detention is permitted to sort of continue the system of ways in which people are put in solitary confinement, they face risk of sexual assault. One of the reasons why that works is because unlike prisons, everyone's sort of heard of prisons in movies and everything. I don't think that most people know that there exists this sort of underground secret network of immigration jails that you don't see. Even the concept of it is a little opaque. That's why visibility is a really important part of the movement. People need to talk about this. People need to be shouting it from the streets. I think that this is a thing that exists because you can hide it in a sort of not in my backyard area. Detention centers, especially like you mentioned in Essex County, or are sort of in behind a turnpike, make a left turn, and then you pass the tannery, and then you pass the sludge factory, and then it's there, and it's hidden from sight, but it's a tremendous problem that is purposely there because if you really saw what was going on there, it would be really disturbing.
So we're going to move on to get questions from the folks online and from our audience here. But before I do that, I'd like to hear a little bit from Carlos and Eva, perhaps for our last question here. In considering what is it that LGBT and allied activists can do to ensure humane solutions for our mutual communities?
So this also kind of answers back to this question, also answers a little bit back to the previous question that you had asked, who has the power to really take action? And as the program coordinator of the Queer and Undocumented Immigrant Project and a leader of the movement, I am a huge movement builder person. I believe in the power of the community that holds power above all. Like the positions, even the president, I feel the president acts on whatever we as a community really push for. And I think the first step that we as a community really need to take is really be intentional about creating spaces to speak about the intersectionality of LGBT and immigrant rights. I think that's the prime first thing that we all need to really address. And how do we talk about these issues in an intersectional way that really allows for this narrative to really be lifted up. The second thing is for, as allies to come out, 67,000 undocumented folks, and really, bring down the stigmatization that undocumented folks still have. Very, very often than not, I hear that the statement of what part of illegal don't you understand? And I think that people are still caught up with this term that is not even relevant to the real situation. Folks that break, that are undocumented in the country have created a civil offense. Hence on why the detention centers is a civil way of detaining people. Nowhere near are they really detaining our community in a civil way. They're really incarcerating us and really putting us in very bad placement. So the thing that I would say is that for all of you out there to continue engaging in these activities, you are very lucky to have one of the strongest groups here in your state, in New Jersey. You have the New Jersey Dream Act Coalition, and with Marisol and a lot of the other folks here, they're really pushing for the community to be the leaders of the policies that we're going to be suggesting. So engaging the community is the #1 thing that I would suggest, and continue pushing policies that are story-based driven.
Well, just like Carlos was saying, I think that it's not only, the government it's the one that has the power, but also the community we have to make our voice heard. We have to go there and show up and make sure that they know that we are fighting for our rights, that we want better life for not just people that already got or being granted asylum, but for people that also are fighting for it.
I think that in itself is a testament to the power of your narrative with regards to this question as well. We've got some time for a little bit more. Maybe? No? If not, we're going to take questions from the audience and from online. If you still have any questions, you can submit them on Twitter. Don't forget using the hashtag #NoMoreDelays.
So we have before we take questions from Twitter, if you guys want to fill out any questions you may have in an index card, and April will come around and collect them. While they're doing that, I have a question from Twitter. It's for Clement. It's about the asylum process. Is it easy to gain asylum in the United States if you're LGBT?
So, like all asylum seekers, LGBT asylum seekers have to prove a couple of things. Like I said before, they have to prove that they're actually LGBT. That can be difficult, especially if you live in a country where, in order to be safe, you spend your whole life deliberately hiding it. I've had clients before where I explain that, and they're like, Mr. Lee, I've spent my entire life systematically trying to hide the fact that I was gay to be safe. Anytime I got an email from a loved one, I deleted it right away. Anytime I got a text with a picture in it, I looked over my shoulder to make sure nobody was looking at it. I lived my life from the moment that I knew I was LGBT to the moment I left America, hiding that. So that is one big obstacle. One thing that I find that helps that is that almost every single asylum seeker I talk to, even if they don't have that extrinsic evidence, has a sort of narrative that makes sense to them. Part of being LGBT is coming to understand that. There's a story attached to it, whether the only person who came out to was yourself, how you came to that. So that's one thing. The other thing you sometimes have a difficult time getting is evidence of the bad things that happen to a person back in their home country. When people flee their home countries, they're literally fleeing. They're not saying, let me take document A, document B, document C. But unfortunately, in a court, that is what you are expected to do. The judge says, I would like to see Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, Exhibit D, all the way down to life. And when life is messy. Life is messy in the United States sometimes. When you are literally fleeing for your life, that is difficult things to get. With the help of a good lawyer, there's ways to try and reach out and sort of get the thing, but I always go back to the narrative itself. And on top of just those logistical things, the way immigration works, our system is, it's broken. If you get into an immigration court proceeding now, it is not uncommon for the judge to bang his gavel and say, your final hearing is going to be in 2018. To live for years with that specter of deportation hanging over your head is psychologically damaging. It doesn't make sense to our country policy-wise. It's contrary to our humanitarian goals. These people, our families, our LGBT families and asylum seekers are terrified of going back to their home countries. They've suffered terrible things. They have really meritorious claims, and it's not. So the answer to the question is it's not easy. There are that many obstacles, and the biggest one of all for lots of people is to get to a place where they're ready to apply for asylum. There's the legal steps and there's the emotional steps. You have to talk about that story that brings you the deepest hurt, that brings you the most pain. It is what drove you to escape everything you knew. That one of the big things that it really gets me. I hear all this terrible things. There's part of a person's narrative when they know that they're going to leave and they have no hope of returning. You don't really get a chance to say goodbye to everybody you knew, everything you knew. There's sort of this very deep melancholy that even after bad things happen, there's this little period before you leave that. It really, so and no part of that sounds easy. It's hard.
I think I would also add to that part that we need to also consider the fact that any asylum seekers that do fall into the detention centers are trying to fix status to those queens. Spend in detention centers around 102.5 days at an average. And then going back to the reality that many of these folks don't have the legal representation, and the Center for American Progress also reported that folks that don't have legal representation, at an average, only 3% of them actually receive some sort of relief. So these are folks that don't have any legal representation that are filing for their own claims, and only 3% of them actually get their own claims. The other thing that asylum cases, they're nowhere near easy. I think Clement is an expert on that. But we also need to consider the fact that their detention centers have, just Congress have made a bed mandate place. They have a 34,000 bed quota, which pretty much means that immigration has to fill those beds, regardless if the person actually is a high case or low case, priority. So whether the person has created a big criminal charge, or was walking down the street, was on his car, past a stop sign, and somehow they got connected with ICE, they would automatically be placed into the detention center. And then, it's very, very, very difficult. So knowing all these other things that are playing to function to the person being in the detention center matters, because within United We Dream, we have a very strong program called the Education at Deportation, which is our end teams, which work to create public campaigns to get people out of detention centers. And I think knowing how asylum works, knowing that sometimes the cases can be granted outside of the detention centers, people don't have to be in a detention center to be granted their asylum case. So that's really plays a role into that.
Great, thank you. We have another question from the audience. And it asks, for those who are trans and in transition, how are they detained? Are they detained on the basis of sex assigned at birth, or are they on the basis of how they currently identify?
So almost invariably, I would say invariably, transgender people are housed with against their gender identity. They're housed in sex-segregated facilities with people who are the sex assigned at birth. So what you see a lot is transgender women housed in male facilities. Inappropriate for all sorts of reasons. And number one is that a lot of these detention centers, in order to, for the trans detainees protections, they're housed in really isolating forms of housing. I've seen people who fled Honduras, who fled El Salvador, who fled Guatemala to tell me about being raped and tell me about being beaten up. But the part when they really break down is when they tell me about being in a detention center and being in this small room where there is nowhere to go, count dots on the walls, and circle around, you try to sleep, but then you go a little bit insane, as any normal human being would do. And there's a little shock that people have when they knew that they were fleeing really terrible things, but when they came to the United States, that was something they had to deal with, being locked in solitary confinement, being housed in a place where they were scared of sexual assault from people. That was something that was really more difficult for them to comprehend than very good. So detention centers for trans people are a really dangerous place to be. Immigration Equality continues to recommend that trans people who are vulnerable in detention should not be detained and should be released. Remember that the point of immigration detention is not to punish the person. The person hasn't committed a crime that gets them into immigration detention. The criminal justice system is a totally different system. If the goal of immigration detention is, as it says, to make sure that the person goes to court, there's so many ways to do it. You can have check-ins, you can have phone calls, you can have so many different ways. And the biggest one of all, our trans clients want to go to court. They want to have their case heard. Like, that's their dream, to explain why they fled and have that be validated. Not only for the legal reason of they get to stay here. There's sort of a sort of closure that you can get, that all that bad stuff that happened to me, wow, somebody's listening to it. It's validating that that's something actually that happened to me. It's sort of a defense mechanism. I think a lot of people say, oh, it wasn't that bad, and they come and then they tell the story and they're like, wow, that really was. So people who are housed in detention centers that are trans are housed inappropriately with people against their gender.
Well,
wanted to mention also that, you know, hormone therapy is very important for transgender people, and you don't have access to these things. And sometimes it's not just the hormones that you need, it's also other health issues that girls or guys have, and you don't have access for that. You don't have access for a phone call, you know, whereas it's really sad that you can't call nobody. You're alone there, and you've been alone for so long, and when you think about it, it's just, I was trying to run away from something, and here I am in a room all by myself, you know. When you think about that, it's traumatizing, you know, like you look to the side, up, down, and there's nothing. It's just you in a room.
And there's something very jarring about a country that says, sure, you can apply for asylum. I get that you face bad things being back in your home country, but in order to do it, I'm going to put you in this room, and okay, you're transgender, but we're going to house you with all men. So I've had clients like ask for extra big jumpsuits to hide the curves of their body. I've had people who've had taken, you know, gender affirming hormone therapy their whole lives, and it suddenly stops, and they watch in horror as their body goes through uncontrollable changes. And to have that with the humanitarian purpose of asylum, it's incompatible.
And I would like to add to the point that how folks are being placed. The Prison Rape Elimination Act that Stacey was mentioning was passed also, you know, to address just the criminal justice system, but also in detention centers. They added rules that would also place folks based on their gender, self-assessed gender. But because ICE, detention center, or just detention centers have become such a rogue agency that they don't even really follow the rules of the federal government. They base their own decisions on whoever the field director is, you know, how the field director is really feeling on the day. They don't place people based on their self-assessed gender, even after they have created their own policies to do such thing. So even there is policies within detention centers that require for detention centers to place people under their self-assessed gender, but the agency is not doing it. It is not following their own rules. So how can we expect for such a system that doesn't even follow their own rule to really bring out the truth to the harsh treatments that our community are facing? So, you know, I just wanted to really bring that up, that there is systems in place, but that the detention itself, the agency itself, is not following their own rules.
Thank you. We have one last question for the panel this afternoon. And it asks, what is the whole process of gaining asylum, which Clement, you discussed, I think, quite at length earlier. They have a follow-up question to that, and it's, are there other legal avenues for immigrants to become citizens?
Sure. Okay.
Co-sign on what you said.
Sure. Okay. So, okay. Until recently, you know, I want to answer this question with like a brief history lesson. You know, being LGBT was enshrined in immigration law as something bad, as something that you deliberately, if you were that, you were like eliminated from these categories. Until the 90s, early 90s, just being gay was a grounds for them to turn you away at the airport. So I want you to get that straight. You could come to the airport, have a picture of, you know, me with a gentleman or a lesbian with her female partner, you know, a photo of them being romantic. They could be like, bye, you cannot come into this country. Until 2010, just having HIV was a grounds of inadmissibility. If you had HIV, they're like, no green card. If you're coming to the airport, you can't come in. So the idea that, you know, are there other ways for LGBT folks to legalize their status? For a long, long time, you know, we were categorically excluded from these grounds. Post the big Windsor decision, which was the Supreme Court decision that struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, that opened up some doors, right? Before, if there was a loving couple where one was a foreign national, the other was a United States citizen, but they were both male or they were both female, and they got married, there was no way for them to get a green card like a straight people could. Post DOMA, you know, this is a new route that's like sort of a new way for people to get immigration status, but, you know, it's not something different for straight people. They've always had this. So when the question is, are there other ways for LGBT people to get status? I think that the answer is yes, but the doors are opening up. You know, there's lots of people, you know, even when when DACA came out, this was a new thing that opened up doors for people. So I think that there are ways for LGBT people to get status. I think that the doors are, with our work, with our collective social work, the doors are opening up one by one. These are hard-fought victories. Before, it used to be, and in many ways it still is, because of access to justice, there were other ways, and we have to fight for even more ways for people who deserve to remain in this country. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. One more question.
So I got a question on Twitter about the delay in President Obama's administrative relief and the number of people getting deported. Is it true that more than 1,000 people are getting deported a day? And how many of those are LGBT?
So there's a report that says that 1,100 people are being deported every day. The number in terms of LGBT folks is not clear for many of us, unless we have heard otherwise. The only number that we, the numbers that, because immigration detentions don't, when folks are coming into the detention center, they don't ask for your, like if you identify as LGBT, what's your sexual orientation, what's your gender identity, something else, and what you express. There's no way of tracking these numbers. So all we know is that 1,100 people get deported every day. And then most typically than not, because LGBT folks tend to be highly criminalized, because we're most of the time pushed out from workers' protections, and most of the time being pushed out to just like the community, just walking while being trans, and here in New York City, luckily now the stop and frisk policies have changed, but even then there's still a lot of criminalization toward the community that sets people up in a pipeline because of secure communities and 287G that gets in contact with the police and then goes into the detention center. But there is not an exact number of how many people get deported.
And that lack of number about LGBT people who are deported is not mere coincidence. I mean, if you are on a track to be detained and deported, it behooves you, probably, that you wouldn't want people in the detention center to know that you're LGBT, but that makes you more vulnerable to being housed terribly. I've had people who are trans think, Mr. Lee, I thought being transgender was a crime because they put me in this small room in this detention center. So I wasn't going to tell them that. So there's reasons why that number is not that important.
Wow, great. Thank you all for this afternoon. And to begin the conclusion of our event today, we didn't just want to have this wonderful conversation, eye-opening in many respects, I felt, and hopefully for you as well. But we want to take some action. So we have, we distributed some of these little cards that provide instructions for you to tweet, email, or call the president to demand justice now, because that is precisely what we came here to do today. President Obama has failed to deliver timely relief from deportation for our undocumented families and our undocumented LGBT. A purported decision to provide administrative relief until after the election. Together, aforementioned above, take out your tweet, email, or call the president and demand justice now.
To add to that part, I think the one thing that I would say is that these are the critical moments that we're living right now, especially on the decision-making process of who gets to be included in any form of administrative relief. And I think, once again, I want to highlight that most times than not, folks that live in marginalized communities are the ones that are constantly excluded. So undocumented LGBT folks are the invisible within the invisible, and I really want for all of you, watching today and also here present, to really become vocal about it, especially if there's any actions, if there's any meetings, if there's any public events that you're attending today or throughout the next 2 weeks, to really bring this as an issue and to really be present on social media, on the actions that the community might be organizing, because we are living in the moment where if we don't act now, our community will be the ones that will be excluded. For me, I am an undocumented student still. All my family is undocumented, and luckily I was able to receive deferred action. But if my father was not to receive deferred action, I think it would defeat the purpose of family unity and just because I am queer, and I think my family is my chosen family, and my dad continues to be my family, and also my friend Jocelyn Mendoza Cuestión, an undocumented trans woman living in New York, who has no other LPR citizenship family member. So it is very essential that in the next 2 weeks you all really rise this narrative up.
For those of you who may not have it, especially for those of you folks online, you want to dial the number. It's 202-456-1414, 202-456-1414. I mean, and keep urging him, not just today, but keep doing it throughout the day, tomorrow, the day after. Just keep reminding him. Okay, so I want to thank everyone here at the Rutgers School of Law for attending this afternoon. I want to thank all of you out there in cyberspace for plugging in and listening to this great conversation. I think for me, most importantly, thank you for all our panelists, because every single one of your inputs, not just of course the facts, the narratives, and really illustrating an experience that is perhaps purposefully neglected, it is vital, I think, to further our understanding of just how broken this system is, how futile it can be for our LGBTQ friends and allies who find themselves further lost in this really draconian and immensely bureaucratic system. So thank you very much for coming today, for those of you who traveled, and for sharing your stories and your expertise. And thank you, of course, also to Immigration Equality for hosting this and for coming here to Rutgers University. So thank you all. Bye.